still a lot of obscurations, a lot of noise there.
Sure.
So is it the same as what you thought with the meditation, like the Shamatha, like anchoring with the breath? Do we do the same with the post meditation? Like going back to whatever I'm doing, if I'm walking, then concentrating on the walking, if I'm eating, then concentrate on the eating.
Okay. So the question is, for Shamatha practice, we want to bring that into daily life. So how do we bring Shamatha practice into post-meditation? And so, of course, in Shamatha practice, we are strengthening mindfulness. We are cultivating a calm, clear, focused mind. So to bring that into daily life means to continue to work with mindfulness during the day. Of course, we can say at the beginning of the day, I'm going to be as mindful as possible throughout the whole day. Probably we'll forget that after a few minutes. So therefore, again, as a little tool to help us as a beginner, we can use what's called triggers. Things to remind us to be mindful. And as you mentioned, that can take the form of certain physical activities. For example, eating meals, brushing teeth, activities that we do regularly each day, and for those to really make a conscious effort to be fully present in that activity. Now, for example, often in the morning, we're sort of maybe running late for work, quickly brushing our teeth, and while we're doing that, we're thinking about all the things we have to do during that day, rush out the door, and then we go, did I brush my teeth? And we don't even remember. So therefore, when we're brushing the teeth, be focused on that. Don't be brushing your teeth and thinking about other things at the same time. Be focused on the sensations of the brush, on the gums and so forth. Similarly with eating meals. Be fully present with eating the meal, the taste, and actually you'll enjoy the meal a lot more if you do that as well. So pick certain activities that you do regularly and really make the conscious effort to be fully present. And as I also recommended, is in general in daily life, when we're doing some sort of physical activity, switch off the conceptual mind as much as possible.
But especially I'm talking about interacting with other people. Like, okay, so I already try to develop the chica and I try to bring it to the daily life.
Sure.
But, you know, sometimes there's obstacles, there's contradictions, there's different views, and
of course.
you tend to sometimes slip a little bit.
Sure. And in terms, here I'm only talking now in terms of mindfulness. Of course, there are many other things we'd like to bring into daily life, wisdom, compassion, but if we're just sticking to the Shamatha for now, then particularly when we're faced with difficult situations, to be fully there, fully present. You know, how often when we're meeting someone, they're talking to us and we're thinking about all sorts of other things. That's not mindfulness. So when we are in front of anyone, and you see this very well with the Dalai Lama, no matter who he's talking to, he gives them 100% his attention. 100%, always. So we can do the same, and, you know, that's what we should do. We don't like it when we're talking to someone and it's obvious they're off somewhere else and thinking about, they're not paying attention to us. So therefore, we should give 100% attention to whatever's in front of us, whether that's a difficult situation or not. And that, of course, is probably going to mean the interaction's going to go better, and also it's a mindfulness exercise. We're fully present there. Okay. So this evening's topic, we can use again this chart that we started looking at yesterday evening, the 3 vehicles chart. And so remember that the foundation teaching, the foundation of all Buddhist traditions, is the Four Noble Truths, the very first teaching the Buddha gave. And this forms the basis of what is now the modern day Theravada Buddhist traditions. And so these Four Noble Truth systems of teachings were transmitted through the Pali language to these countries, Myanmar, Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, Sri Lanka and so forth. So these now are collectively known as the Theravada Buddhist traditions. And what we saw in the Four Noble Truths yesterday evening was that the final goal of the spiritual path, that third noble truth, truth of cessation, is to achieve liberation from suffering, to achieve the goal of nirvana. And we see this here in this chart. And we saw that the fourth noble truth, the truth of the path leading to cessation of suffering, what are the practices we need to engage in to achieve that goal of nirvana, were here described, normally presented as this noble eightfold path. And that these 8 practices can be condensed into these 3 core areas of practice of ethics, concentration and wisdom. And what we saw was there that the wisdom practice, or sometimes referred to as the Vipassana practice in Theravada, involves mainly gaining 3 insights called the 3 marks of existence. The first there was impermanence, to come to realize everything's changing moment by moment, and that will, by realizing that will dramatically reduce our attachment to pleasant things, aversion to unpleasant things. Coming to realize the second insight, the second insight of suffering, or dukkha, the first noble truth, by realizing what the human condition is, and then particularly that we are stuck in this state due to the mental afflictions, we will then develop this aspiration to be free of that state, which here, of course, is renunciation. So that second insight will lead us to developing the aspiration for nirvana. But then, of course, we need to progress towards the goal of nirvana, and for that we gain through the Vipassana practice of no self. Because in the Theravada tradition, based on the Four Noble Truths, the assertion is that the fundamental ignorance we are suffering from, our distorted view of reality, is simply how we see ourselves as a person. We overinflate the sense of me, and we grasp onto what's called an autonomous self. That is a false view of person, of me, and we need to come to realize we do not exist in this way as a self. And if we can realize that, we can eliminate all mental afflictions and suffering and achieve the goal of nirvana. So that is the Theravada Buddhist tradition based on the Four Noble Truths. Then, now, this evening I want to talk about the other 2 vehicles here, the Mahayana and the Vajrayana. So the word yana means vehicle and Maha means great. So the Mahayana vehicle is based on the other 2 wheels of Dharma, the perfection of wisdom teachings that we talked about. So the first system of teaching, first wheel of Dharma, Four Noble Truths, is the basis of the Theravada Buddhist traditions. And then the second and third turning of the wheel were the perfection of wisdom teachings. And remember, in that third turning of the wheel there were 2 parts. The one part about there being no external world, that everything's mind only. And also there's teachings in there on Buddha nature. So these 2 form the basis of the Mahayana vehicle. That these systems of teachings, which of course also include Four Noble Truths, transmitted from India through the Sanskrit language over the Himalayas into China, Korea, Japan, Vietnam, and then also into Tibet. So those Buddhist traditions now are collectively known as the Mahayana Buddhist traditions. And in these teachings, particularly these perfection of wisdom teachings, the Buddha went a little bit deeper and further than in the Four Noble Truths. That in the Four Noble Truths he said that the fundamental ignorance is grasping onto self. But in the perfection of wisdom he said actually there's a deeper level of ignorance than that. The deeper level of ignorance is grasping onto independent me, independent world. And also in the perfection of wisdom teachings he said that he went further in terms of not only can we achieve the goal of nirvana, our own personal liberation, but we can achieve the further goal of enlightenment. So these ideas is what Buddha taught here in the perfection of wisdom and also in this third turning of the wheel. So these are the teachings that were transmitted to these countries, which are now called the Mahayana Buddhist traditions. So let's have a look at this Mahayana vehicle and these system of teachings, what we have here. So here in the Mahayana, then we see in this chart that the final goal of the spiritual path is enlightenment. It's a further step than nirvana, and we'll look shortly at what the difference is. But before we do that, I'll just mention a couple of other things first. So of course, if we achieve the goal of enlightenment, we become, and that enlightenment in Sanskrit is Bodhi. If we achieve the goal of enlightenment, we become Buddha. Now, of course, to strive for the goal of enlightenment, we need to develop the aspiration. And that aspiration is here bodhicitta. And that is based on the aspiration of renunciation. Because renunciation is the wish for us to be liberated from suffering. And on that basis we can then understand, well, I'm not the only one stuck in this state of dukkha or suffering. Everyone else is in the same state as me. So then on that basis we can go on to develop the aspiration to also help to liberate others from suffering as well. But then we can understand, well, in my current condition, I can't really help others very much. How can I best help others be free of suffering? Is if I achieve full awakening. If I achieve enlightenment, then I can really be effective in helping to liberate others from suffering. That is bodhicitta. So bodhicitta, bodhi is enlightenment, citta is mind. So bodhicitta is literally the mind of enlightenment. And it's defined as the aspiration for enlightenment for the benefit of others. So we are aspiring to enlightenment so that we can really help to liberate others from suffering. So once we have cultivated this aspiration of bodhicitta, then we enter what's called the Mahayana path to enlightenment. So that is the door of entry into the Mahayana path. As in the Theravada path, the door of entry into the path to nirvana is when we develop that aspiration of renunciation. Then we've entered the path to nirvana. When we develop this aspiration of bodhicitta, we have entered the path to enlightenment. Someone who has cultivated this aspiration of bodhicitta is called a bodhisattva. You see this here in your chart. Bodhisattva, again, bodhi is enlightenment. Sattva here means courage or strength. So a bodhisattva is someone who has the courage or strength to strive for enlightenment. So then when the bodhisattva strives for enlightenment and achieves enlightenment, that bodhisattva then becomes Buddha. How does the bodhisattva strive for enlightenment? What is the path? What is the Mahayana path to enlightenment? So we saw in the Theravada that the path to nirvana is this noble eightfold path. In the Mahayana, the path to enlightenment, the practices that we need to engage in are normally presented as the 6 perfections. We see them listed here. So, very briefly, we'll go through the 6 perfections. The first one, generosity, is the intention to give. And we can give in a number of different ways. At the sort of initial way of giving, or basic way of giving, of course, is giving material things. But then, of course, we can also give protection from fear, we can give love, and we can also give what's called dharma, meaning we can give advice and guidance to others on the spiritual path. So these all come under generosity, the intention to give. The second perfection here is ethics. So remember, in the Theravada, the core of ethics is simply avoiding harmful, non-virtuous behaviour. Here, in the Mahayana path, ethics is more proactive. So ethics here not only includes the ethics of avoiding harmful, non-virtuous behaviour, it also includes the ethics of engaging in virtuous behaviour and the ethics of benefiting others. So more proactive. The third of the 6 perfections is patience. So we saw already earlier that patience is simply an undisturbed mind in the face of a difficult situation. The fourth one is joyous effort. So here, joyous effort is defined as a mind that delights in virtue. In other words, a mind that's happy to do good things. So when we look at the fourth one here, joyous effort, what we don't want to do is turn our spiritual practice into some sort of hardship that we have to endure. That's not joyous effort. So if we appreciate the benefits of these practices, we'll joyfully do them. So actually then they'll really become effortless, because we'll be happy to do them. So this is how we overcome laziness, by seeing the benefits of the practice and then joyfully engaging in effort in these practices. And then the fifth one, of course, is concentration, single-pointed concentration. And the sixth one is wisdom, or the Vipassana practice. So, as with the Eightfold Path, these 6 perfections can also be condensed into the same 3 core areas of practice, because we can condense generosity, ethics and patience into ethics, and then joyous effort is something we need to apply to all 3, and number 5, of course, is concentration, wisdom. So we have ethics, concentration, wisdom, and then joyous effort we need to apply to all 3. So also in the Mahayana, we have the same 3 core areas of practice. And here in the Mahayana, when we talk about the wisdom practice or Vipassana practice, we're mainly talking about this wisdom of emptiness, or in Sanskrit, shunyata. So of course in the Mahayana, we're also coming to realize impermanence, suffering and no self, but we are gaining a deeper insight into reality. This deeper insight that there is no independent me, no independent objective world. And if we can directly realize this emptiness, that is overcoming our fundamental ignorance, and through that we can move along the Mahayana path to enlightenment. Now, what is the difference between nirvana and enlightenment? So we can talk about what's called the 2 obscurations. The afflictive obscurations and the cognitive obscurations. The afflictive obscurations is our mental afflictions. So this is what is stopping us from achieving nirvana. our mental afflictions, in particular that fundamental ignorance, is what is stopping us from achieving nirvana. So if we want to achieve nirvana, we need to eliminate these afflictive obscurations, our mental afflictions. The cognitive obscurations are what's stopping us from achieving enlightenment. And the cognitive obscurations, and we'll look at what these are in more detail later on day 9 when we look at the Vipassana practice in detail. The cognitive obscurations are subtle stains in our mind due to our ignorance. Because here in the Mahayana, the assertion is that there is no independent me, no independent world. But when we look out on the world, it really does appear to exist independent of us. But then you can ask, well, if that's not how the world exists, why is it appearing to exist like that? Why is it appearing to exist independent of us if it doesn't really exist independent of us? And that is the cognitive obscurations, is that there's subtle stains in our mind that cause this mistaken appearance. So to achieve enlightenment, we need to get rid of those. So that's the cognitive obscuration. So to achieve enlightenment, we are eliminating both obscurations, the afflictive and cognitive. To achieve nirvana, we only need to get rid of these afflictive obscurations. So that's very briefly the Mahayana. Before I go on to briefly talk about Vajrayana, any questions about that?
So according to Theravada, the Buddha is not seeing reality as it is, right? Because he still has the cognitive.
No. According to Theravada, there's no such thing. Because there is an independent world.
Okay, right.
No problem.
Can you repeat, please, the cognitive?
Yeah. So cognitive is that we have some stains in our mind from our ignorance, and we'll talk more about that later, but these stains are causing this mistaken appearance, because the world does appear to exist independent of us, but in the Mahayana we're saying it doesn't exist like that. So the question is, if it doesn't exist like that, why does it appear to exist like that? And it's because of these subtle stains. That's what's causing this mistaken appearance. So we need to get rid of these subtle stains in our mind. Those subtle stains are these cognitive obscurations. But of course, according to Theravada, there's no subtle stains, because actually the world does exist like that. That's okay.
So how does one who has achieved nirvana see the world, and how does one who achieved enlightenment see the world, or whatever?
According to Theravada or Mahayana?
all four. No.
So for Theravada, there's not really a difference between nirvana and enlightenment, because there's no such thing. So the Theravada say that the only person who really achieved this was Prince Siddhartha 2,500 years ago. And it's not really much different to nirvana. It's just that maybe he has a little bit more ability, that's all. So that's Theravada assertion. And for them, how we see the world now, when we achieve enlightenment and nirvana, it'll still be the same. No difference. In the Mahayana, of course, very different story. Is that someone who has achieved nirvana, the world will still appear as it appears to us now, but for them it won't cause a problem, because they'll know that this is not how things are. So they'll never buy into it. So it never causes them a problem. Someone who's achieved enlightenment, the world does not appear to exist independent of them. What that means for us is unimaginable, because we've never had that experience. So how an enlightened person sees the world, difficult to appreciate, because we've never had that experience.
Kind of a lucid dream.
No, because in a lucid dream, even though we're lucid, the world still appears to be independent of us, doesn't it? But we know that it's not. But it still appears as if there's a dream world there, even though we're lucid. But we know that actually it's not like that. It's a product of our mind. But for an enlightened person, we don't even have that appearance. It doesn't appear to exist independent. What that means for us is difficult.
Is a direct realization of emptiness and enlightenment the same thing?
No. So the question is the direct realization of emptiness and enlightenment the same thing? To achieve nirvana or enlightenment, one realization of no self or emptiness is not enough. For nirvana, we need to realize no self again and again and again and again, many times, to slowly wipe out all the mental afflictions. And saying, for us to achieve enlightenment, we need to have a direct realization of emptiness again and again and again, many times, to slightly wipe out both of these. So it'll take time. So one realization, no, but someone who's enlightened is always realizing emptiness. Always. Even outside of meditation.
I have two questions. One is the Four Noble Truths and then perfection of wisdom. Is can you connect it to like conventional truth and then ultimate?
In all three of these systems, and this is actually one of the we're going to touch on tomorrow evening when we talk about these philosophical systems. We can talk about conventional truth and ultimate truth in all of them. What they say they are is a bit different, but they all talk about conventional truth, ultimate truth.
Okay.
Yeah, but different ideas about what that means.
Isn't it Nagarjuna?
Nagarjuna is an Indian commentator who wrote a text on this, and he's the founder of the Madhyamika system.
The truth and the truth.
Yeah, but that's just one philosophical system that he established. Other philosophical systems also have talk about these things, but it's not the same meaning.
Now I'm not arrogant, now I'm sarcastic. You know, in the Jewish scripture, there is a big discussion about the subject, which is how many angels can stand on the head of an eagle.
Sure.
So I would like to ask you for a mercy. You are standing in front of you Israelis in Yechia, who hardly knows how to spell the word Buddhism.
Correct.
Why do you do this to me?
Because
I mean, have mercy. I mean, you know, I hardly know how to breathe rightly.
yeah.
So,
So what I'm trying to do is slowly present a framework for our practice. And we should not have the expectation that we hear this once and, okay, that's clear. That's not going to happen.
you think we have expectations?
Well, some people do. I mean, some people do, and they get frustrated when they don't understand.
Okay,
Yeah? But,
I rest my case.
yeah. So,
But the next Buddha will be in 2 million years from now, so
I will not be here.
Yeah.
give up with
but, see, the thing is that we need a framework for practice, but we need to practice. So, if we don't have a sort of a clear framework for practice, then one, we probably won't know what we're doing. And two, we won't know if we're heading in the right direction or not. And three, if we have some sort of experience, what does that mean? So it may seem like there's a lot of just intellectual stimulation here, but the Buddha was not a philosopher. The Buddha was a doctor. But to help others, you need to present some framework so that they can take the medicine in a good way and benefit from the medicine. If we simply meditate without some understanding of framework, we won't know what we're doing, why we're doing it, where we're going, and it's like the example sometimes is that if we want to go into uncharted territory, somewhere we've never been before, it's good to have a map.
Yeah.
If you don't have a map, you're going to get lost.